議員薪酬及工作開支償還款。
Members, let's start our meeting. We have reached form a quorum. I now call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Subcommittee on Members' Remuneration and OER Operating Expenses Reimbursement. This is about the 7th electrical members' reimbursement of operating expenses and remuneration. We have a paper, CRM 432/1819. The Secretariat has prepared this paper in respect of the review of the honorarium, the remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement of for members of the 7 electrical. And also there's another paper, CRM 433/1819, on the situation with regard to the operating expenses of work related to electrical members. As in the past, we would at least start a year before the beginning of the next term of electrical, review the arrangement for remuneration and OER, so that we can consider proposals and submit our recommendations to the administration, to the Independent Commission for consideration. After the careful consideration, the subcommittee has decided to use a weighted index to take the place of CPIC as the basis for adjusting the operating expenses for members of offices. After consulting all the members, the subcommittee has agreed to submit this recommendation to the adoption of the weighted index for the 7th Ledge Code to the administration. To make sure that whether we should make such a recommendation to the administration, there was a questionnaire survey conducted in February this year to collect information and consult all electrical members. 54 members responded to the questionnaire survey. The results are now set out in the paper CRM 432/1819. In addition, to facilitate the relevant review, the Secretariat has also compiled a paper setting out the expenses incurred by the members in the last 2 legislative sessions. That is from October 2016 to September 2018. The details can be found in CRM 433/1819. So I now invite the Secretary to brief members before we proceed to a discussion. As members said, we have conducted a questionnaire survey. 54 members have responded to the survey. The results are now set out in CRM 432/1819. It's in paragraph 6 to 30. Let me highlight some of the important points in respect of the staff costs of the operating expenses to assess members' expenses in recruiting and retaining the staff to support their work in electrical. We ask members for their views on the expenses situation. 49 members have responded to us. According to members, on average in 2017-2018, would engage 8 members full-time and 3 part-time staff in 2017-2018. 32% of the full-time staff, it would be from 10,000 to 1,500, and 90% from 50,000 to 20,000. 71% of the staff are educated up to the university degree level. As for the length of service, 60% have been in employment for fewer than 3 years, and 21% from 3 to 10 years. As for the wastage and turnover of members officers. According to the 49 members in 2016, 2017, and 2017, 2018, for full-time staff, the average turnover rate is 20% and 18% respectively in those 2 years. For 2017, 2018, among those full-time staff members who left, 40% of them were paid between 10,000 to 1,500, 10,000 to 15,000, and there's a number under 20,000, and 81% of them left before they have served for 3 years, and some of them have said that they have got pay with better prospects, and 23% said they had got jobs with higher pay. Under the review, the lack of prospect and pay are the two major reasons for their failure to retain these staff. In order to let members have the necessary and staff to complement their work, 39 members responded to our questions, and there was no majority view in this regard. According to their responses, if we take the average, members thought that they would need 9.6 full-time staff and 1.7 part-time staff. On average, there will be 2 who will be managers and professional people, and 5 will be educated up to degree level, and then the 3 clerical and supporting staff. For detailed breakdowns, please refer to Appendix 6 of the paper. As the best remuneration that we should offer, members have different views. Among those who have responded, 34% thought that for managerial and professional staff and full-time staff, the lowest pay should be between 35,000 to 40,000. Those with a degree education and they are managers, 32% should be for between 15,000 to 20,000. 26% said that it should be 30,000 to under 35,000. According to the past pattern of operating expenses, 70% of the expenses were used on staff costs on average. So every member would be using $108,000 on staff costs a month. On this level, and according to the 36 members on the optimum staff complement that they would need, 30% of the members thought that the current funding would not be able to allow them to have the staff complement that they need. That's in Appendix 7. As for district ward office, 47 members responded to this question. According to them, in 2017-2018, for ward offices operated by electrical members, there's an average number of ward offices. That's in the table. On average, every member would have 2.3 offices, and that's not counting the central office in this electrical complex. Among those who responded, 27 of them will have to pay rent fully met by the operating expenses allowed. 11 of them would incur rent expenses not fully met by the electrical operating expenses. Not fully met the rent. And as for the question of the optimum number of ward officers that they should have, 29% have responded. They think that on average, they should have 4.2 offices. The breakdowns can be found in the table under paragraph 18. In accordance with members' information on the number of average rent to be paid for each office, if you have to rent 4.2 offices, the expenses would amount to about 32,000 something a month. If we look at the 10% level used on their offices, that would mean 22,000, which is not sufficient to pay for the 4.2 offices that members would like to have, and that is the rent for these 4.2 offices. As for the entertainment and traveling expenses, and 50 members have responded, 24 of them thought that this should be increased, and the current provision is insufficient. 4% thought it was sufficient, 24%, 32 members or 44% have no comment. among the 24 members who consider the amount of entertainment and traveling expenses allowance should be increased, 18 of them have proposed the level of increase that should be implemented. That's in paragraph 24. Most of them thought this should be increased to 240,000 to under 250,000. We have also received other views. Some members think that for entertainment and traveling expenses should be adjusted in accordance with inflation and also the rate of increase demanded by transport companies and tunnel companies. As for the members' remuneration, 68% or 44% of those responded had no special views. And 32% of 60 members think that the remuneration should be increased, and some of them think that reference should be made to the politically appointed government officials or directorates as civil servants. As for medical allowance, 54 members have responded to this question, and 19 of them have made some comments. Some think that the level of medical insurance should be make reference to the age of the member, so as to make sure that members of different age may have suitable support and suitable insurance. And there's a suggestion to take out group insurance. And now the allowance is paid annually, and there's a suggestion that it should be paid per term instead of per year, so that the members will have more flexibility to have this allowance to meet unforeseen circumstances. And there's also a recommendation, proposal to increase the allowance by 10 to 15%. And there's another suggestion that the insurance should also cover the immediate family members of their members. And then not many members, 98% of them have no comment on gratuity, and there's a members who say that the gratuity is to meet their retirement life, and so that should be tax exemption. And also, based on an earlier consultation as mentioned by the chairman, the majority of electrical members support the use of weighted index to the adjustment of the OOER. According to this latest survey, apart from the adoption of a weighted index, members have no majority views on other issues under discussion. So in the light of above, members are invited to advise that apart from the use of a weighted index, should this subcommittee make other recommendations to the administration. Let me also mention another paper, CRM 433/1819, and that is the situation with utilization of members' OER. This is to facilitate the review of OER. The paper sets out that in the first 2 years of the current term, as well as the full term in the last term, the full 4 years of the last term on OER for the last term, the utilization of 92.1% for the first 2 years of the current term is of 85.6%. In the last term, 43% have used 90% or more of the allowance allowed, and this term is 45.6% who have used over 90%. If the allowance is not spent in a year, it can be rolled over. As for entertainment and traveling expenses reimbursement, the average utilization in the last term is 96.7%. For the first 2 years of this term, it's 97.9%. For both years, about 91%. 64 members use 94% or more of the allowance allowed. Although the over-ceiling expenses are not reimbursable, in order to understand the expenditure pattern, the Secretariat asked for information from members. For the last term of electrical and for the first 2 years of the current term, 12 members and 7 members provided information on over ceiling expenses. Yeah, the exceedance is about 5,000 to 700,000, and this for this year is 220,000 to $590,000. As this is done voluntarily, the information cannot fully reflect members' resource requirements in the discharge of the duties.
Next is about setting up an information technology expenses reimbursement that suits, during the last term and also the first two reimbursement years, some 73.8% and 43.9% of members have claimed such allowances. And also, in terms of winding up expenses reimbursement during the last term, the average utilization rate was about 54%. Last but not least, about medical allowance. During the fifth term of this council, in terms of the overall utilization, is 55%, and this term, during the first two reimbursement years, is 64%. And members can also note that starting from this term, members who have not been able to use up to the maximum amount can roll over that to the next year or next term. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you, Secretary. I'm sure members would know that members' remuneration can be divided into several parts. First, the so-called salary or remuneration every year. And on top of that, we also have different allowances for office operation and also traveling and also entertainment. And also every year, we also have this medical allowance. And then fourthly, gratuity. So those are the personal gain for members, but then on top of that, we also have OOER. So that's not the personal gain of individual members. It's about the working expenses. So for the four sources of revenue and also one reimbursement, and if there is no adjustment whatsoever, in the past, those have been adjusted in line with CPIC. That is our Consumer Price Index C. So that's been the way to adjust it. It's not about a pay rise, it's an adjustment. But then last time, after the meeting, we issued this paper to consult members' views, and we're talking about changing the mechanism from the CPIC-based adjustment mechanism to a weighted index mechanism. We believe that that would be more reasonable. And apparently, the views have been rather unanimous. So it's not about a pay adjustment. Just look at the adjustment. So we will be adopting a weighted index and CPIC approach. Yes, members have already responded to the questionnaire survey, but then I'd just like to be more specific about this. So can I consult members here and now? If we were to make the suggestion to this council concerning the next term of this council, if we were to adopt this weighted index approach to replace the current mechanism of adjusting in line with CPIC, any comments from members? Yes or no? So can I be given some indication by members? Yes, Mr. Ho Kai Ming. All right, I agree with your overall direction, but then it's about the OOER. All right, we'll still be adopting the CPI. Well, for district office or district councillors, we'll be using CPIA. I think that would be more in line with the day-to-day expenses, for example, the procurement of stationery and so on. But then if we were to rely on CPI, we have no problem at all. So that's all we think. Thank you. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with your overall recommendation in terms of the rate of adjustment. It's about the adjustment mechanism. All right, for the rate of adjustment, we'll be discussing that later. So it's about the adjustment mechanism. Instead of adopting or going by CPIC, I'd just like to ask questions about the survey. Can we discuss that now, or do we have to discuss that under another item? You're referring to the questionnaire did by the Secretariat. So can we discuss the findings? Well, first, are we going to adopt a weighted index approach, or should we adjust it in line with CPI? So there were 4 personal sources of revenue and also 1 OOER. So are we going to adjust it by way of a weighted index approach? Well, that I agree. Okay, we'll discuss the rest later. Anyone else would like to comment on this? If there is no further comment, then we'll move on to the next item concerning our remuneration. The current remuneration, according to the survey, members' remuneration. We haven't seen very strong views expressed by members. Apparently, that has to do with your personal interests, and therefore, members dare not come up with very strong views. I think that's in line with the objective situation. Because if we were to suggest a pay rise for ourselves, apparently we are serving our own interests rather than serving the community, and there might be some repercussion from the community. Okay, so that's set aside. Okay, Jeremy Tam, I don't think that will cause any embarrassment at all, because there is no guarantee that we'll all be back next term. Indeed, are we going to run for a second term? We still don't know. Okay, you talk about $98,540 per member per month. So what's the basis for this? So what's the basis for coming up with this remuneration? All right, I joined this council in 2004, but then I still don't quite know about how it was decided, because you have to know the basis before you can really discuss it, or else there is no way that you can tell is too high, too low, or what. I believe that the secretary joined this council even later than myself. When I first joined this council, I think the remuneration back then was about $60,000. So that was many years ago. So thank you, Secretary. Yes, concerning the question asked by Mr. Jeremy Tam just now, in the past, there was this independent commission, and every time when they reviewed the remuneration, they would also submit a report. And with regard to the last term of this council, they said that the independent commission would be considering a basket of factors, including that the role to be played by members, and also Hong Kong's economic situation, the general public's pay, and also the economic condition and so on, in reviewing the remuneration and also the OER for members. So there is no comparability. All right, if there is any comparability at all, for example, for the General Secretary of the Secretariat, what's his pay? How was it determined? Well, I remember I was also involved in the work of the subcommittee, and I remember when I talked to the independent commission, they were of the view that members of this council were not full-time jobs. This is just a part-time job. And there is the nature of the work is that is a community service. For example, taking myself as an example, I also have other business, and for a member coming from the well, some members might be lawyers themselves, or some might be doctors, medical doctors, and then from the banking constituency, they are themselves bankers, and therefore being lawmakers are just their part-time jobs. But then I remember when I first joined this council in 2004, I remember back then the remuneration was about $60,000. So how did it come about? Was it that given the fact that it's a part-time job, that's why it's only worth $60,000? And also for CPIC, every year there would be some adjustment, and by now, as you can see, it's about $98,000. What I'd just like to know the comparability, because after all, we are all working in this complex. So I'd like to see how we can compare with the staff of the Secretariat. So when compared to the staff of the Secretariat, well, yes, there is no direct link with government's pay scale, well, under the legislation of the Electoral Commission, well, for the Secretariat staff would be pegged to civil service pay. So we would be pegged to would be commensurate with civil service pay, and then for us at the directorate, for us at the Secretary General level would be pegged to the directorial pay of the civil service, and then for the rest they'd be pegged to the master pay scale. So what is your pay pegged at? D6 equivalent. Well, that's information in the public domain, but then my apologies, I don't have the specific figures with me. So how much are you, what's your pay? Well, sorry, I really lost count of it. Too much? That's why you don't know? Well, I don't think that's what you should say. Well, Chairman, the reason why I asked that question, I'm sure you can check it online. The reason why I'm asking this question, says Mr. Jeremy Tam, that's because, well, some members are now suggesting that we should peg it to some pay scale or certain officials, for example, the pay of an undersecretary, for example. Well, Mr. Tam, I think the point that you're raising should be discussed under the next item. So what's the basis for remuneration? I thought you were allowing me to speak on that already. No, not yet. We're just talking about the adjustment mechanism for every term. So should we adopt a weighted index approach? I think that's been agreed. So I thought we've already entered the next discussion, because you didn't see that there were new members joining the meeting. Okay. Mr. Wu Chi-wei, any comment on the weighted index approach to replace the current CPIC approach? Chairman, I think the discussion is just a general discussion. I don't have very strong views about this. I think the critical issue is the basis for the entire system. So what should be the basis for our remuneration? Okay, let's now move on to the next item. Mr. Tam, you may now continue. I think Mr. Chu just told me that, Mr. Chen, the SG's pay is about $290,000. Well, because some members said that members' remuneration should be pegged to some government officials. But then the background to this is that right from the very beginning, members of the public did not treat it as necessary. So we are not trying to change it. So I was asking how much are the Secretariat staff paid? Because to a certain extent, or in fact, this council comprises 70 members, and logically, we are the employers of the Secretariat. So we are hiring them to serve us, and if we are paid 3 times less than how they pay or how much they are paid, then no wonder they think they can usurp our powers because they are paid more than we do. I don't think that's an appropriate analogy, okay? So D6 is only paid $260,000, not $290,000. So it's $30,000 less than what I originally said. Okay, so should we be pegged to the pay of an undersecretary? Well, can we peg our pay with the SG, let's say 1/2 or 1/3 of the pay of the SG? Would that be more reasonable? Well, I joined this council in 2004, and back in 2004, I already joined the work of the subcommittee, and initially it was Emily Lau who was the chairman of the subcommittee, and back in 2004 we discussed the pay for the next term in 2005, and in 2005 I also joined the subcommittee, and we were there to discuss the remuneration package for the 6th term, and by the time when it was the 6th term, I remember starting from last term, I was already the chairman of the subcommittee.
工作。
And I do the same this term with regard to Mr. Tam's request. Well, someone already asked for that when I joined this subcommittee. There was a question about the basis of the determination for our remuneration. You know, for directorate civil servants, they have D1 to some more senior people. So we asked, well, what's the equivalence of the directorate pay? But the independent commission never accepted this suggestion. Of course, we can raise it again if Mr. Tam thinks it's right to do it. Yes, anything else? What has happened to your foot? It's aching. My understanding is that our remuneration is below D1. We are below D1 pay. So we are below the directorate pay, but our Secretary General is paid D6. I find this curious. That's why I think I understand why the Secretary General is so powerful. It's not a question of the pay. Well, I don't mind if there's a pay cut, but I want to establish a mechanism, the basis of remuneration should be ascertained. We'll ask for an explanation, a further elaboration from the independent commission. I think this issue has been in discussion for many, many years since I become an assistant to a member. Well, but the undersecretary and secretary would never put up a show like a priest or someone who's possessed. But I did see this yesterday. I think we should put aside the question of our own remuneration. We should get more resources for our assistants so that they can do better research. Members' personal remuneration should not be our focus. If you agree, we should move on to the next part of our agenda. I would set out Mr. Tam's comments in my report. It doesn't represent, of course, the view of the subcommittee as a whole. And Mr. Ho Kai-ming, your comments will also be reflected in the report. The matter will be looked into by the independent commission. Mr. Yip Kyun-yun, I think we should also deal with members' remuneration, because there's a serious downward spiral in our remuneration because of the low adjustments over the years compared with the civil service and other sectors. So our relative position is getting lower and lower. I would like the Secretariat to look at the past 10 years, the adjustments, the annual adjustments of our remuneration, and compare them with the government pay points. And you can tell the approximate equivalence of our pay, our remuneration. It's a senior officer. It's now close to the pay of an officer. So there's a big difference. Let's not compare with directorate civil servants. The gap is just too wide. We're just a lower middle rank civil servant in terms of pay. If you adjust it by 4 or 5%, and we only get 1 or 2% every year, then after a few years, and the trend continues, will become the paid like a low-rank civil servant. The original intent is that we should get reasonable remuneration. In the past, this was meant to be an honorarium, because being an electrical member was an honorary appointment. But now we have more full-time members who work as full-time electrical members, and they should get a reasonable pay. So the pay should be pegged to a reasonable pay point, and then the annual adjustments present is adjusted in accordance with CPIC. I don't think it's appropriate. We should refer to the adjustment made to civil service pay. Let me suggest this again. Let's look at the past 10 years. What's the relative pay of electrical members' pay point of electrical remuneration vis-a-vis the civil service? Because if we continue like this, in 10 years' time, the problem will get even more serious. So we should look at what pay point we should peg to and the rate of annual adjustment. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, I think Mr. Wu Chi-wai is asking for some justification in our grounds for deciding our remuneration. It doesn't necessarily lead to an increase of remuneration, but at present it's rather arbitrary. And then you decide on the level of remuneration followed by the annual adjustment based on inflation. This is not reasonable. As Mr. Yip Kin has said, given the context of the arrangement, if we compare with a civil service pay, well, we are going down all the way. So we started with something close to the directorate pay, and now it's lower and lower in comparison. Well, we should have significant and big increases of operating expenses to enable us to hire assistants that we need. I think this is the consensus of all the parties represented in the Council. But it seems that past adjustments were not very satisfactory. So, Chairman, you should consider two issues here. So, first of all, the rate of adjustment to our OOEL, should the adjustment be good enough to enable us to hire competent assistants to support our work? And secondly, we should come up with an effective arrangement to compare our remuneration with certain ranks of government officials. Well, Mr. Chan, our Secretary General, is paid at D6. If you say we should be 1/3 of his pay, I don't mind. But if there's such a linkage, then we can discuss whether this is the right level, the right peg, and the public can judge whether this is reasonable. The public would know whether we should pay 1/3 of the secretary, who would refrain from responding to the politically sensitive issues in our work, and then they would know whether the public would tell whether we are performing as expected from as the office holder of member of electrical. Well, this is issued with a long history. It's repeated every term of electrical, and I will certainly put your views in the in my report, and that's all for remuneration. Next is entertainment and traveling allowances, expenses allowance. Any comments?
嗱，如果冇意見呢，我就跳落下一個啦。
If there's no comment, then the next issue to discuss is medical allowance. We're given an allowance for medical expenses. Some would use it to take out insurance. Some would get reimbursement on the medical expenses incurred. According to the survey, some members have suggested that we should take out a group insurance for electrical members. Secretary General, if we are to take out a group insurance coverage, would it be more expensive than what we have been paying members in the form of an allowance? If we are to take out a group insurance policy for all members. In past terms of this council, the same issue was explored, and we did sign out from an insurance company on the premium. The premium was considered to be on the high side, so after more discussion, the independent commission decided on granting an allowance. It was considered more appropriate then. Members, any comments on this issue? If not, then we would stick to the existing arrangement. The independent commission would either follow the weighted index or approach or some other approach agreed. About gratuity, the rate, according to the survey report, did not attract a lot of comments, but there's just a suggestion that it should be tax-free. We do not have any MPF or retirement benefits. There's only the gratuity, and gratuity attracts salaries tax, which can be substantial. I think it's 70 to 80,000 of tax, because the gratuity is about 400 to 500,000, so it's quite a big sum. So when you leave the office of electrical membership, it would be a rather big burden that you have to pay tax for the gratuity. What do members think? That we should ask for tax exemption? So the suggestion is that the gratuity remains the same, but it should be tax-free. We call it gratuity. I think we should be treated like ordinary employees. Some employees are given gratuities, and of course it has to be taxed. But everyone is in the same boat if we don't have a universal retirement protection. If ordinary employees have to pay tax for their gratuities, I don't see any reason why we should be different. I don't think this is legally arguable. We are given a a sum of gratuity once every 4 years. I believe that that's already better than the general working population.
Okay, if there are no further comments, then we're not going to bring up this issue of tax deduction for or tax exemption for gratuity. What we are most interested in would be the OOER. So what are your views? How are we supposed to submit this report to the independent commission? Yes, Secretary, can you explain to us as to the system of the OOER? Yes, Chairman. Well, in terms of the OOER for district officers, well, taking this year as an example, for the ceiling is about $2.7 million per year. In other words, on average, we're talking about some $22,500 per month. And as I said just now, so that can be brought forward. In other words, if you have not been able to use up to the ceiling, then you can also bring it forward to the next term. So it's given as a lump sum, and then it's up to members to decide how it's to be used. So it's $270,000, $2.7 million for the entire term. So it's to be divided by 4 years, and if you're not able to use up the $2.7 million, then you can roll it over to the next year until the end of your term. I've been striving to do that. In particular, for our assistants when they leave office, in terms of the MPF contribution and also the long service payment, we also have to pay for that. And if that is taken into account, then every month we will be overspending. So after a lot of recommendations being made, I finally managed to increase that. I remember since joining this council, every month I have to reserve a certain sum every month for that purpose, and now I no longer need to do that. Yes, Mr. Ho. Thank you, Chairman. Well, just now we talk about offsetting. That is for the winding up reimbursement. So for the next term of the district council, we can also take that into account. All right, they just made a new adjustment, because when they wind up their office, they can incur different expenses. For example, for severance payment and also long service payment and so on, they can use it for those purposes. But then we already have that winding up allowance. Is it that there is no ceiling whatsoever? No, there is. Secretary, well, for the winding up expenses reimbursement, there are two parts. First, is accountable. So it's an accountable portion. So it's about 112. So 112 can be accountable, and for the other part, that's for severance payment. So that's what the district council has been doing, and they just follow our practice. Yes, Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like the Secretariat to help out, because in Appendix 7, if you look at that table, I'd just like to clarify. So you have already asked members that for different ranks of staff, how much should they be paid, and then according to that, that's the most desirable manning level. Is that a target, or is it the real situation on the ground? Yes, Secretary. Well, that's the target of members. So that's what they think to be the most desirable manning level. That is how many staff do they need, and what their pay should be. Because when I read Appendix 8, that's the next page. concerning the office, for office rental, that should be the actual figure for now. So I'd like to know, well, in terms of our remuneration in the survey, has that been surveyed about the actual pay expenses? So how much I actually am paying, and also the calculation in accordance with that formula, and whether or not there is any gap in between. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, in para 7B of the paper, actually we have already looked at the actual manning level of the officers, and also the actual staff, and also the pay that they are receiving. So we have already conducted a survey on that. So that's contained in para 7B. But it's not like it's not set out in the format of Appendix 7, right? No. Chairman, if you look at the comparison, well, then the next question is, well, in Appendix 8, you talk about the existing annual expenses of the officers, and just now the Secretary said that if members were asked as to how much they need, then they would, on average, said that they would say that they need 4.2 officers on average, and then the amount would be about $30,000. That's the target, right? Correct. But then you have not been able to make any comparison. For example, for some lawmakers, they would be spending about $370,000. Some actually spend up to $700,000 a year. And then when compared to someone, okay, you're talking about 4.2, and if you multiply that by $30,000, so there would be a discrepancy. So for some members, they don't need any district officers, and therefore for them, the expenses would be zero. So have you been able to do that at all? Can you prepare a table on that? Well, that depends on the manning establishment, because whether it's about the number of staff and also their remuneration, we have invited members to give us the figures. But then for the number of district officers, basically we only ask members as to what's the optimum number of district officers that they hope to have. But then for the actual rental, we haven't asked them, because it depends on the type of officers that they have been able to rent. So for the rental difference, it can be very big. The location is one thing, and also who's the landlord. For example, if it's premises within housing estates under the housing authority, then it's very different from premises in the private market, because for ground floor ward offices, the rental could be very different. That's why in conducting the questionnaire, there's some difficulties, because for the housing authority, the rental would be rather stable. But then for private premises, if you set up a ward office there, then you may have to move once every 2 years because of the rental increase. Chairman, can I also give a comment? In fact, I'm very grateful to this survey, because this survey report actually brings up one issue that is very clear. First, in terms of the staff establishment, for the conventional FCs, if you look at Appendix 3, in terms of the staff turnover rate, is somewhat lower. Well, for conventional FCs, according to my rough counting, about half of them remain in office. Comparatively speaking, for those returned from GCs, for the wastage rate is a lot lower. That might show that for conventional FC members, well, relatively they need to hire fewer staff members, and as a result, the stability of staff would be somewhat better. And for the GC members, as the pay would be lower, that's why the turnover rate would be higher. And then in Appendix 8, concerning the district officers, I think the problem is more acute. Because for FC members, I did a rough counting. 9 members did not lease any district officers at all. And even for those with district officers, at most they only had 3. So I think the Secretariat can also look into this. In terms of the leasing of district officers, if you just mix the 3 types of members, and if you just came up with this average 4.2, it may not be able to reflect the actual demand, because for GC members, they need to have a certain number of district officers, and the number might be higher than 4.2, and then for conventional FC members, they might not need that many. Well, the average might be just 1 to 2, and therefore the expenses in that regard, well, even if we just talk about the expectation, there is also a gap. Well, for the conventional FC members, they might think that they do not need that much, but then comparatively speaking, for those returned from the GCs, they need more. And therefore, Chairman, when you look at the OOER, I think for remuneration or staff remuneration, if you look at Appendix 7, well, the target we should be moving towards should be about $200,000. So for different sectors, it might be more or less the same, but then for the office expenses, there is a gap. And therefore, my suggestion is that looking at the setting up of district offices, I think for GC members and also conventional FCs, in terms of the amount that they can apply for reimbursement, there should be a difference. That would better reflect the actual situation and also the expectation. Okay, Mr. Chu, I can understand what you're trying to drive at. Well, for district officers, you think that for GC members and for FC members, they should be treated differently. Yes, correct. Well, on this very issue, previously, when I first joined the work of the subcommittee, in different sectors, they brought up this issue. The first principle to go by is that for FC members and also GC members, there should not be differential treatment because they are both lawmakers. That's point number 1. Point number 2, well, for members returned from GCs, from FCs, does it mean that they do not need any district officers? In fact, if they want to set up district officers, they need more, because for those returned from GCs, if they are from the Hong Kong island, then they only need to have district officers in Hong Kong island. But then for those returned from the FCs, they need to have district officers on the Hong Kong island, on Kowloon Peninsula, as well as the new territories. That's the reason why some of them simply would be hesitant in setting up any district officers at all. So there was some discussion on this, and then eventually we were of the view that we should leave it to the independent commission, and the independent commission's conclusion was that we should treat them on equal footing. Well, we can also include your views to the independent commission and leave it to them to decide. I'm not wasting time, Chairman, says Mr. Eddie Chu. Well, my purpose is not to reduce the overall expenses reimbursable to FC members. Obviously not. But then you said that, well, for FC members, if they were to set up district officers, they might need more. It's just that they don't have enough money, or there is no such premises available. It's just that there is no way that they can do it, because if they were to set up district offices in all regions in Hong Kong, then they simply will not be able to do it. That's why in Appendix 8 they have this discovery, because some 9 members did not have any district office at all.
當中咧其實有6位咧，佢都冇再提話要幾多㗎。
And 6 of them have not indicated how many they would need. I think they represent certain sectors. For example, Heung Yee Kuk FC, they have already got the Heung Yee Kuk building, and they have the rural committee offices. So maybe they don't want to open any district office. You're right. For example, CMA, the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong Federation of Industry, they have got their own chamber building or chamber premises, and these members represent a certain trade association, and they can contact their constituents through such offices that the chambers of commerce already have. The same goes for Heung Yee Kuk. But there are other functional constituencies. For example, the one sitting behind you, Mr. Ip Kin Yuen, represents the education sector. Well, his constituents can be found all over in Hong Kong, Kowloon and the NT. If you ask him to open district offices, where can he go? If you go to one district, the others might complain about discrimination. And he is big, where do you go? North, south, east, or west? So I would just say that this issue was raised in the past. But of course, your comments will be recorded. If there's no other comment, now I would like to consult members. If this is agreeable, the Secretariat would draft a paper to report to the House Committee on the outcome of our deliberations, and we would request that we request the adoption of a weighted index approach. Our report to the House Committee, if accepted by the House Committee, will be forwarded to the Administration and to the Independent Commission for consideration. Sorry, Mr. Chi, this has come to my mind. For Appendix 7, since we have a consensus in respect of this part of the matter, and paragraph 6 of the paper states that on average, every district office would incur $157,000 on staff pay. And if we look at Appendix 7, we see the desirable number of staff numbers and the pay levels. The average is 230,000 plus. I'm not talking about the difference between the number of district officers between GC and FC members. But if we are to address the high turnover rate of assistant, and the person we are only living within a certain very strict pay levels. For example, there's a big difference of $70,000 a month that is not met. Well, this will be mentioned in our report. Under the operating expenses reimbursement, the main element is staff cost, not our own remuneration. We certainly want to do more for our assistants. All right? further comments? All right, we are very efficient, and I'm grateful for the Secretariat now that they would prepare a report for us. All right, there's nothing else on the AOB. Meeting's adjourned.